Greetings, and thank you for joining us for the second episode of DC Animation with Spenser and Friends. This is an LMG Podcast Production. Today, I am joined by a dear friend. I am going to let this dear friend introduce himself.
Hello again. This is David, one of the ambassadors for the LMG podcast. I do like that intro. That was nice. That was great work there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Mr. Percival is a voice that you have heard if you have listened to the League of Melanated Gentlemen before. He's been featured on a couple of episodes. He is an ambassador for the League of Melanated Gentlemen. And Mr. Percival, I'm happy to have you here.
Happy to be here. Appreciate you allowing me to join.
Oh, it's no problem at all. I'm sure this may not be your first episode. We're going to see if you want to take this journey with me through more of these.
Oh, I absolutely will. Absolutely.
So tell me about your DC consumption. Comic books, TV shows, movies, video games, any DC things you have consumed.
Yeah, so animated movie wise, I will say this was a first. So it was definitely new experience. I've definitely seen, the vast majority, if not all of the at least recent within the last, 15, 20 years, live action movies. Video game wise, always played, a few, always played some of the games growing up. You're going to have to help me with names because it wasn't my go-to, like the Arkham games or some of those are always really fun. But then comic book wise, I know I've talked to you and Jordan and Willis about that at times. I've definitely not been a comic book person in my life. So a lot of these things like this one we're covering today was definitely new material for me.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So with that being the case, as you'll notice when you listen to this, we will have a wide range of expertise on this show. We will have some people who are coming in completely blind. They've never had any DC experience ever, and so they are watching this movie as it is. We're going to have some people that have a little bit. We're going to have some people that are experts, that know the comic books, that have seen all of the movies, that have a wide range of knowledge with DC, because this is a very inclusive space, and I want to see where people are as far as how they feel about these movies, for people who know everything and for people who know nothing and everything in between. So, as I have said before, I love DC animation. It is a quality product and has been at least since year of our Lord 1992. So, that's just how I feel about it. So I really appreciate you for joining us on this journey through DC animation. Today's film is Justice League: The New Frontier. This movie was released February 26th, 2008, and the comic book on which it was based is DC: The New Frontier. I'm going to read a synopsis in my own words, and then Mr. Percival and I are going to just discuss how we felt about the movie. So we open to narration from the center, talking about humans' destructive nature and how the planet must be cleansed. After the opening credits, we are taken to Korea, 1953. Hal and his wingman are flying their planes when they are attacked. Hal's plane is damaged and he is forced to eject. It looks like Korean soldiers have not been made aware of the ceasefire. So when Hal lands, he is attacked and forced to kill the soldier that is attacking him. We then cut to Gotham, where a green man has been teleported from Mars. When the man who teleported him there dies, the green man shapeshifts into that man as a disguise to get around. In Indochina, 1954, Wonder Woman is celebrating with a group of women there, and Superman shows up. She explains that the women were being held prisoner and being used for, things, and Wonder Woman came through to save them. Those women killed the men that were holding them. Then Superman starts lecturing Wonder Woman about people being afraid of them and vigilantism and all that. And Wonder Woman says she did what she thought was right and shows Superman the door. We are then taken back to the Green Man, who is watching TV and shapeshifting into the characters that he is seeing on the TV. At a casino, Iris West is interviewing a celebrity when suddenly Captain Cold comes up and robs the place. Of course, Flash shows up and Captain Cold has placed bombs around the city to distract him. Captain Cold is defeated, but briefly gets possessed by the Center, and that's super confusing. But the Center is confused because he's looking at Flash like, why are you faster than these other humans? I don't know how I feel about that. But that's fine. So John, the Green Man, has been working as a detective with Gotham PD. He walks in on Batman fighting a bunch of cult members preparing to sacrifice a child. A fire breaks out, and John is pretty much useless once that happens. They defeat the cult, but the Center possesses one of the members to let them know that they will be judged. Hal is training with Rick Flag to get on a spacecraft to Mars. Batman shows up to John's house and suggests that they work together, but also lets him know that if he needs to be dealt with, that won't be a problem either, because Batman don't play around.
No.
John finds out about the Mars mission, and Flash retires from superheroing because he is being hunted by the government. John shows up at the Batcave and gives Batman the information that he has gathered over his investigation. He also lets Batman know that he is leaving. He plans to return to Mars because humans are just terrible and ignorant and racist and all of that.
No, not one bit, Spencer.
So John isn't able to get on the rocket. The engine fails on the rocket, and Rick Flag tells Hal that there are weapons on board. Hal is ejected and saved by Superman, while Rick Flag blows up the rocket and John is taken prisoner. Wonder Woman is training when an ominous shadow appears. Hal is abducted by an aircraft and taken to Abin Sur. He explains that he is that sector's Green Lantern, and he was on his way to help fight the Center, but the explosion that Rick Flag set off has mortally wounded him. So he wants to give Hal his ring. Superman and Batman are going over the research when they hear a giant pterodactyl attack. So Superman takes care of that, and Wonder Woman crashes in the invisible jet, letting Superman know that the Center is on its way. John has hope in humanity and wants to help save everyone from the Center. The Center is presenting as a giant island and begins attacking. Superman goes to investigate and is shot down by the Center. Everyone bands together to devise a plan to defeat the Center. The fight begins, and John is immediately incapacitated. Faraday dies trying to save him, so then he gets his shit together and starts going to work. Hal makes it into the Center's core, but shit starts getting weird, and the Guardians give Hal some Lantern Ring instructions, and he is able to save himself and his wingman. Flash is able to destabilize it, and Green Lantern yeets that thing into space where it explodes. Aquaman drops Superman off on the surface, and the movie ends with a JFK speech and a montage of things and DC characters that fans will recognize.
America. That's how it ends.
Yeah. Very America.
Yes.
Mr. Percival, what were your thoughts on this movie?
So, I mean, as first time around DC animation, I was a big fan of the animation style. I thought you just the action sequences, just the general look. I was a big fan of. I also thought just voice acting wise, I thought they had a bunch of big names that, I didn't really anticipate seeing those, like Neil Patrick Harris and, John Hurd and other names. So it's just like, I didn't really know what to expect going into it, but it was a good time. It was funny just because I definitely have more of a, MCU knowledge base, just some of the things that there are similarities between, DC and Marvel, just like, for example, just the first like 20 minutes kind of had, or maybe not 20 minutes, but the first 10 or 15 minutes kind of had a Civil War like, butting of heads between, Wonder Woman and was Superman, who showed
Yep.
up to the island and stuff like that. And you could just kind of see, and I think that's just something you probably see across DC and Marvel, just where there are very similar, not like plot points, but I don't know the word I'm trying to find. But it's just, I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'd like to get your thoughts on it, since you are more of the expert, and how closely it followed the comics and whatnot.
So I think that it did a very good job of following the comics as far as I know. And I think that the art style was very good, and it was appropriate, and it made sense, because when you look at the comic books and then you look at like the style of art and cartoon from that time period, it definitely made sense. Like, whenever I think of cartoons from then, I think of that kind of art style.
Absolutely.
And so I think that based on the time period in which the movie took place, the art style made a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it fit and all of that. Now, with the actual movie, this is the only time that I've ever seen the center. I don't know that I've seen the center in anything else, which is fine. But yeah, the center was an interesting villain.
I
I
felt like
think,
the center was somewhat lame. If you,
yeah,
yeah, it
and
just didn't. Yeah,
I'm not mad at that. Because I mean, it was a floating island that was pretty much like, I'm going to cleanse the earth of all
yes,
of this. I mean, and we've seen that type of villain before, but we've seen it done better, I think.
mm-hmm.
I would say, as far as Marvel goes, like Ultron had that kind of like, humans are a disease and we need to get rid of
Yes,
them. And we didn't see that done super well in the movie, but most of the other things that Ultron has appeared in, like Ultron is a serious problem.
mm-hmm.
And there's always got to be something that brings them together. Now, the one thing that I'm not 100% sure about, I'm not sure how established the Justice League was, because we have, the Justice Society and the Justice League of America and then the Justice League. And so there's different iterations depending on the time period. So I'm not sure how established the Justice League itself was, or if this was supposed to act as the thing that brings them together. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about this movie is that it plays with the idea of the morality of the United States being a little more nuanced and a little more complicated than it was before. Because one of the things that's mentioned is like, in World War II, it was very clear. Like, the Nazis are bad. That's what it is. Nazis are
Yeah,
bare bad. We're
not much
good.
argument there.
Yeah, there's not a lot of room to negotiate. But, in a post World War II era, things are a little more complicated than that. And the people who are, supposed to be the good guys aren't doing very good things.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there are differing views on how to handle certain things, because, as you mentioned, we saw Wonder Woman and Superman having kind of an ideological conversation about, Wonder Woman saying, no, these women were abused and they were in a terrible situation. And all I did was subdue the people that were oppressing them. And
Yeah,
they made a decision. And I wasn't about to stop that decision, because I think it was the right decision. They should be lucky it wasn't me, is kind of what Wonder Woman said. And then Superman was like, yeah, but we shouldn't allow people to kill other people. And Wonder Woman was kind of like, yeah, we shouldn't allow people to enslave others either. And that's what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
So them being gone don't bother me, Clark. And so, it's one of those things. And one of the reasons that I wanted you to watch this movie was because I wanted to see if you caught one of the similarities that I caught, because along with the rough time period, you are a Disney person and a
Mm-hmm.
Pixar person. And so I know that you are very familiar with The Incredibles. And
Yes.
I didn't know if you would see the same similarities between this and The Incredibles that I saw.
Um, Definitely not when I was watching it. I did not make that connection. Um, I'm sure you will provide me multiple examples as to what correlation you saw. But now that I can kind of think through it, I mean, you know, I think I'd like to hear from your side, and let's see if I can, piece that together, because off the top of my head, I cannot make that connection.
So outside of just the time period, we kind of see a situation where superheroes were at one point, pretty okay to do stuff. And then we move into a time period where superheroes are having to deal with some issues. And the public is not quite on board with superheroes, because in this particular movie, I think that they are dealing with a lot of McCarthyism. So accusing superheroes of being communists, and that being, related to their secret identities thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of do all right, we need you to either work for the government or we need you to register in some kind of way. We need to know who you are. And then we have some superheroes that are like, yeah, I'm not really about that. So I'm just going to kind of do stuff, but over here on the side.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna just like not tell anybody about it. I'm just keep a low profile, but also keep everybody safe, And so it reminded me, I think the combination of the time period and the, pre flashback. I mean, we're not really given flashbacks, but like just the things that are mentioned are, superheroes are cool. We like them because there's something going on that needs handling. And then the public starts to be like, I don't know how I feel about this. I think we should like not do that. And I'm not saying it's, just super direct connections, but it felt kind of like The Incredibles borrowed from this a little bit. I mean, as far because the comic book came out in the 80s, but
Uh-huh.
and that's just what I noticed. The Incredibles is one of my favorites, and so
Right.
that may be why I like forced a connection. But it
No, I mean, I could definitely see that. I mean, Incredibles is top tier.
absolutely,
But just I can kind of see that where, just kind of them still trying to, fit into society, but then also just the kind of butting of heads when I think it was when the Flash showed up to like with the military, and they point the gun right at him, and like the butting of heads, and then Superman shows up and just kind of like, hey, chill, we're all in this
yeah,
together, kind of whatnot. So no, I can definitely see that.
yeah. And then at the end of the movie, the people were like, "Hey, we like superheroes again because they
No, you're right.
helped us and got us through this whole thing." And we also see in the flashbacks that there are a bunch of things that happen, but that's just a connection that I saw.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and again, I may be forcing it a little bit, but I'm not saying that it's like a one-to-one, but it felt like there was some inspiration that may have happened for The Incredibles from this comic book or others like it.
No, for sure.
And so we see, one of the things that happens a lot in comic books, and I see it very specifically in DC, is there will be an alien or somebody who shows up and they're like, humans are the worst. And then they spend some time with them, or, and of course, humans are the ones writing this. And so it makes sense that everything would turn out to be like, oh, humans are actually great and wonderful and super. Yeah, like humans end up being the greatest species by the end of it, according to aliens that could wipe the planet clean if they wanted to.
Yes.
Because we see that with Superman. We see him say, you know, I love humanity. Humanity's great. I want to do everything I can to save humanity, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, yeah, but Lex Luthor is human and he's
killing everybody.
Yeah, like Lex Luthor's a problem. And Lex Luthor, understandably, because Lex Luthor's like, nah, you could end all of this and I don't like it. So I need to be ready for that. Like Lex Luthor is just Batman with a different agenda.
Yeah.
And so Martian Manhunter kind of comes to the same conclusion. He's like, humans are pretty terrible. And then later he's like, oh, wait, they're actually pretty cool. And it's like, you sure have seen a lot of negative.
And then one positive thing and like, oh, just kidding.
Yeah, like you see now, and I will say it was, you know, a combo because he and Faraday kind of helped each other realize some things because, you know, when Martian Manhunter got there, he didn't have any feelings toward humans, but he keeps reading people's minds and being like, oh yeah, people are terrible, all these news stories. And because that's why the Flash was like, no, I'm done. If I'm going to be treated like an enemy by my government, then I can't continue to do this. Because the Flash was, you know, helping people and doing hero things, and then he had a gun pointed at his head. And he was like, no, I can't do this anymore.
No.
Because, you know, that was putting his lady in danger and all of that. And so I definitely get that. Because one of the things that happened while Flash, or during Flash's like, hey, I'm quitting moment, we see that the news story is that John Wilson, who's going by John Henry, died at the hands of the Klan. And it's like, that, you know, unfortunately, that's humans in the 50s and 60s. Like that's how that would have gone. And Flash goes on TV and is like, he was a good man, and that's what happened to him. And I can't have that happening to me. So let me just go ahead and step back. I'm gonna see y'all later. And so I think that this movie does a good job of incorporating history into the whole picture and taking elements of truth and a lot of things that actually happened and building a story kind of around them and kind of inserting their own superheroes and their own characters into some of these, you know, potentially real moments that could have happened.
Because it definitely makes it relatable, and, you know, you can really make that call back to history, and definitely makes it feel, I mean, obviously, you know, it's a TV show and comic book, but definitely makes it feel more realistic, because it's like, oh, I mean, kind of like what, I mean, this is completely different, but how, like with The Boys, where it's just like, you're like, oh, this could happen in real life. But like for this, it's obviously a completely different animal, but you know what I mean? You can kind of make those callbacks to like society.
No, I know exactly what you mean, because The Boys does a lot of, we're going to use this show as an allegory for exactly what's happening in real life. And The Boys does that very well.
Yes.
The Boys does a good job of putting a spotlight on some of the worst parts of these United States and the dangers of capitalism and the people who are in power basically hurting people and making sure that certain people are not held accountable for the things that they do. And, you know, all of these things are so true. And I would say that The Boys is realistic in that regard, because the characters in The Boys, in my opinion, are a lot more human.
Yes.
Because we do have good people in this world, but I think that we are painfully aware that if there were people that actually had superpowers, that it would be monetized in the way that it is in The Boys.
100%.
Yeah, like it absolutely would. And I like that, we have stuff like DC Comics that is a little more uplifting. It gives people hope because we see bad things happening
For
and
sure.
we see people getting hurt, but we see a lot of people that are, making the right choice and that are doing the right thing for the right reason because they don't have to do that. They don't have to go out of their way to try to make sure that the defenseless are defended. And
Mhm.
so we can see a lot of hope and inspiration through those things.
Yeah, definitely. I did have one quick question.
Okay.
So with and this might be something we continue to see just as we continue this series in these watching these movies, but kind of the style of this movie where they would like each scene, they were kind of shorter scenes and it would just focus on, one hero and then jump to the next one. As someone who isn't super familiar with the heroes and, seeing them without their, suits and everything, that could be confusing at times, but it's nice to like individually show each one of them in their different circumstance and then bring them together. But I didn't know if that was a style that the animated movies did repeatedly, or if it like that was just this movie, or if you kind of see what I'm saying.
I do. And I will say that for group movies, that does happen. I'm not going to say that anything is standard because since there are so many of these movies and since they're all, handled differently, because there are some of them that we will talk about later that exist in the same universe, but
Mm-hmm.
these beginning ones are very standalone. And that's one of the things that I like that DC does. They do standalone things that don't belong in a larger universe, and they also do connected universe things as well. So I like that a standalone item is an option because it feels like for the MCU that is not on the table at
Yeah.
all. And I mean, people want a connected universe, and
Mm-hmm.
so I get it. And they can, they say that there are some things that are not connected, and it's like, no, it happens in the same universe. They just may not deal with any of the other things we already know about.
Yeah.
But it's very clear that, like, no, this still exists in the same universe. So I will say that there are other movies that do that, and there are even some shows that do that. So, for example, in the latest season of Young Justice, which I highly recommend, the first half of it is we're spending a couple episodes with different characters. So we'll spend, I don't know if these are the exact numbers, but like, for example, we spent the first 3 episodes with Artemis. We spend the next 3 episodes with Zatanna. We don't see Artemis at all. We just see what Zatanna's doing. We spend the next 3 episodes with Rocket on a completely different planet, handling some political nonsense. And then eventually they all come together and kind of be like, well, this is what I was doing. Oh, this is what I was doing. So
Yeah.
we do see that formula whenever we are dealing with multiple people at a time. This story primarily focuses on the 3 people that we see the most. We see
Mm-hmm.
Martian Manhunter, we see Flash, and we see Hal.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 that I would say get the most screen time in this movie. And those are the 3 whose journey we're actually kind of going on, because Superman and Wonder Woman and Batman, they just kind of show up.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not about them as much
No.
as it is about the other 3. And that's another thing that this movie kind of does that's not normal in this formula, because we know that if we're going to call a big 3, it's going to be Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this movie makes a decision to say, we are going to focus on these 3 other people
Mm-hmm.
that are arguably just as important. And I think that that's something that's a good thing, because we've seen Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman several.
Yeah.
Like we know what's going on with them.
Absolutely.
And as we go through the series, you'll notice that there are a lot of standalone Batman movies, a lot of standalone Superman movies, a lot of movies that's just those 2 together.
Uh-huh.
We've got the next episode, Batman. The episode after that, Wonder Woman.
Gotcha. I guess that does. I mean, those are good points because this one being my first DC anime movie, and it is a bunch of characters. Well, I mean, obviously Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, like I'm familiar with them, but it being the first one I'm watching, and I knew Hal Jordan was Green Lantern, but seeing him, not really necessarily knowing too much about his backstory. So that's kind of, I guess, why it was confusing, because I'm kind of starting with a movie with, 6 or 7 characters versus a standalone movie with Batman or something like that. So,
Yeah.
but no, all those points make sense.
Yeah, and I think that's a good reason, or that's one of the good things they did here, because they're introducing you to the characters that you're less likely to know how they got here or what their situation is.
And then they just show Batman being Batman, Superman being Superman, and then
yeah, they just showed them, because that's what they do. Like,
yes,
we know what those three are probably up to right now.
Yeah.
And so I like that this movie does that, because a lot of people just know that Hal is Green Lantern, but don't know how that happened. And so we don't see him as Green Lantern for very much of this movie. Like,
no, not at all.
Yeah, he is Hal for the majority of this movie.
Yeah, and some of those scenes I kept being like, hey, use your powers. And like, oh, well, he's not the Green Lantern yet.
He's not, he don't have that yet. And that's one of the things that I like about this, is we see him as a pilot for a long time. Like, it may be an hour in before he uses his ring.
Oh, 100%.
And the movie's an hour 15.
Yes.
So we see Hal far more than we see Green Lantern. And I like that about this movie, because that's not, like, a lot of people probably had no idea that Hal was in the Air Force and that he was a pilot, and how a lot of this happened and how these events brought him to being Green Lantern.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's deviation, because this story is told 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways, but that is usually who Hal gets his ring from, is Abin Sur, because Abin Sur was mortally wounded and is like, somebody worthy got to take this ring. Sometimes Abin Sur is like, I pick you. Sometimes Abin Sur dies, and then the ring flies off and is like, that guy. Yeah, we pick him. So, it just depends. But
gotcha.
Generally, that's how that goes. So,
very nice.
Some of the things that we see at the end of the movie, because we end kind of just on a montage of things that, again, fans will usually recognize pretty immediately, but may or may not. We have we see Lex Luthor doing capitalism, and I noticed that it was Lex Co, and usually it's Lex Corp, or at least as far as I'm familiar with his company, it's usually called Lex Corp as opposed to Lex Co. I thought that was interesting, because it would, I mean, that's probably something that has happened. Like, it probably was Lex Co at some point, or in different books, or whatever, but I'm used to it being Lex Corp. We see the Justice League getting medals from the president, and it looks like it is John F. Kennedy
while he's speaking his giant speech.
Yeah, while he's giving his speech. And so I think that, I mean, and that speaks to what time period we're definitely in when the movie is happening. We see the Doom Patrol show up, and some Cold War propaganda. The Doom Patrol is DC's version of the X-Men, even though it's actually the other way around, because Doom Patrol came out first, I believe. Okay. So the X-Men are actually kind of a copycat of the Doom Patrol.
Ooh, don't tell Jordan that.
He'll be fine. But I have no problem admitting that, in my opinion, X-Men did it better than the Doom Patrol did. But, like, there's a smart guy in a wheelchair as their leader, and it's a group of outcasts that, have been brought together to better the world.
Yeah.
That sounds like X-Men to me.
Pretty similar.
Yeah, just a couple things, notes that they took from that. We see John Henry and his son. For anybody who doesn't know, In a lot of stories, John Henry becomes Steel. If you have seen the terrible Shaq movie from the 90s, then you may know Steel, but hopefully that is not your only point of reference for Steel. We will be discussing Steel much, much, much later because we have a movie or a sequel to a movie that we'll talk about later that he is a part of.
Okay.
But he is connected to Superman in most of his iterations. We see Rick Flag's son talking about how, or not talking about, but he's, giving a presentation like my hero, my dad, because he sacrificed himself and saved the world pretty much. And we've seen Rick Flag in Suicide Squad.
Okay.
In the live action Suicide Squads. So we saw him, as the leader kind of in the first one, the leader as in the person that was appointed by Amanda Waller to be their leader.
Gotcha.
And then we see him in the second one, and he and Peacemaker have their encounter. So, yeah. We see the Teen Titans get formed.
Good old Teen Titans.
Yeah. And we see it was definitely the Teen Titans, but looking at them, it felt more like Young Justice, but that's just because of the roster that it was. Like those, either way. Young Justice and Teen Titans are essentially the same thing.
Okay.
But they were never, I guess, called Young Justice. Like Young Justice was the name of the show, but they were just kind of called the team. They never had an
name there.
they never, I don't know that they ever had an official name in the show because their whole thing was they were covert and they did their work behind the scenes in the shadows. They did a lot of the things that were not client facing, if you will. We see a bunch of villains that show up, and that's one you can just pause it and see. I know that guy. I know that guy. I know that guy, because there were a bunch of people that showed up on there. We saw, just off the top of my head, I remember seeing Darkseid. We saw the Joker. I'm pretty sure we saw Grodd. We saw Brainiac. We saw Black Manta. Just a bunch of villains that show up in the DC universe that we will probably see some of, if not all of, later on as we explore these movies.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed that little montage at the end, and just kind of gives you kind of a picture of, more of, the DC animated world. And no, it was a fun movie.
Yeah. And then we also see one shot that's pretty iconic and pretty relevant, because Starro, as far as I know, is what actually brought the Justice League together the first time. It was the world threat that everybody had to join forces in order to defeat. Starro shows up in the second Suicide Squad movie, the second live action Suicide Squad movie. We've seen Starro in other things. Starro shows up in Batman Brave and the Bold. Starro shows up in Young Justice, actually. Starro is a giant starfish alien type thing that creates little copies of itself, attaches itself to people's face like a parasite, and then if you have a Starro on your face, you then become a slave of Starro.
Oh.
And so Starro takes over planets that way.
Okay.
And the Justice League had to defeat Starro. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, back in the 50s, that was the world threat that brought the Justice League together. And one of the stills in the montage was reminiscent of the cover of that comic book.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So yeah, speaking more on the center, I'm not going to say I was disappointed, but it was
you can say it. You can say it.
I just thought it was it's a weird floating island that had prehistoric animals as its defense.
Yeah. And then even when they flew inside of it, it was like, hallucination. But
it was an acid trip.
But you're really okay. And it's like there really wasn't anything that.
Because that's the thing. I wasn't sure about that, because they were like, "Hey, don't believe any of the weird things that are happening, and they were also like, but they're happening.
Yeah.
So are they happening or not?
I also wouldn't fly straight into something that looks like a giant fireball, and then it turns out it was just a bright light.
Yeah, because we saw that, like, the thing that they flew into is what obliterated Superman.
Yeah, that's why I was a little confused about that.
See, I'm not going straight into that. But
No.
these are men who knew, like, they were like, no, we know what we signed up for.
True.
But yeah, like, I'd be thinking, no, that's a laser.
Yes.
A big ass laser. And if it decides to shoot while I'm on my way, that's not going to be good.
Yeah.
If it took out Superman, I'm not flying into that.
Yeah, I'm just a human.
Yeah, I am a guy in a vehicle, and Superman died, as far as we know.
Yes.
So, no, I'm not doing that.
No.
But, it's fine. It's cool. One of the things that we do see that it's very standard for DC to do this, and I hate it, but I get it, is to incapacitate Martian Manhunter. We see this in most of the things that he's in.
Mm-hmm.
Because Martian Manhunter is a fucking problem. Martian Manhunter has so many powers. We know that Martian Manhunter can shapeshift. We know that Martian Manhunter can fly. Martian Manhunter has both psychic powers. He's telekinetic and telepathic. He can get into your mind. He can do all of the mind things. And he's a very strong telepath and very strong telekinetic, along with the super strength and the flight, and he's able to get a lot done. Like, we saw that once he, snapped out of it and, got right after Faraday died, he started ripping those things apart.
Uh-huh.
Like, a Martian Manhunter.
No, he's a problem.
He is a problem. And yet, a lot of times when we see him, just over there, just
he just folded down with his arms crossed and
just
like
and I'm like, he shouldn't be useless. He should be ruining a lot of people's day right now. But that's a normal thing that we see from him. Mm-hmm. We see him, be in a situation where he has to be nerfed because he could end things quickly in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Now, in this case, I guess it's fine because we know that the center has some sort of telepathic abilities because it was able to possess people. And so we know that it has mind powers. And so the fact that it just started attacking John makes sense. But I'm like, so why wasn't it attacking anyone else? Was it only able to attack Martian Manhunter because Martian Manhunter had mind powers? Or, like, I don't, that's one thing I'm like,
I don't see any reason to that logic.
Yeah. And, another power. Martian Manhunter can turn invisible and phase through solid objects. That's how he got into the Batcave. He just
has a little bit of everything.
He can do, between Martian Manhunter and Superman, the majority of the powers are covered.
Yeah.
Like, the powers that just exist that a lot of people only have one of, those two equal like 10 or 11 people together.
Yeah.
So Martian Manhunter is a problem. And unfortunately, we often have to see Martian Manhunter get nerfed because if Martian Manhunter was able to just let loose, it would end quickly. And that's one thing that I'm happy that Young Justice did, because we see Martian Manhunter's quote unquote niece, McGann, who's, a very powerful Martian. We see her do some stuff and it's like, see, that's what a Martian can do. Like, we see her get things done. And, she doesn't always do it in the cleanest way, but we see that she is very, we see through her that Martians are very capable.
Yeah.
In Young Justice, there's, she has a brother who's, causing some ruckus as well. And So that show does a good job of like demonstrating now Martians are a serious problem.
Yeah. The more you talk
Um,
about this Young Justice, the more it makes me want to watch it.
it's a very good show. I
Yeah.
highly recommend it. Um, like especially like because the first two seasons, masterful,
Yeah.
just so good. If we get through the movies and this show does well, we might have to talk about Young Justice because
Nope. I'm down.
that is DC animation. So if you're listening to this, take this journey with us, and on the in-betweens, go watch Young Justice. It's very good. And, I just want to point out that all of DC's animation is good, movies and shows, because we have, all of the Justice League stuff. So, Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Justice League Unlimited. We have all of that. We have Teen Titans, which is a great show. We have Young Justice later on. We have Batman the Brave and the Bold. There's an excellent catalog.
Much. There is so much that I have a lot to catch up on.
Yeah, excellent catalog. Static Shock is good. Like there's a lot. So back to the task at hand. Mr. Percival, what would you rate this movie on a scale of 1 to 10?
As someone who again was very unfamiliar with this going into it, I had a great time. I'm a pretty easy critic, or I'm not a critical critic. But I'd probably give it like a 6.5, 7, where I had a good time with it. Now it's hard to like, what am I comparing it to? Just scale of 1 to 10, or, when we talk about movies in MCU, it's like you know what I mean? It's standalone. I don't know since I have so much to catch up on, I don't know if I would watch this one particularly again, but now that I've seen it, it does get me interested in watching more. And that's kind of all I could ask from this.
Okay, good. I will say, and I'm sure I've said this before, but this movie is very early. So there's a lot. This is number 2 of many. And this movie is from before DC started to create a connected animated universe through their animated movies. And every standalone movie is going to be its own thing. Like, I would say, as far as quality goes, all of the movies are at least pretty okay. And I would say of all of them, this one probably in the bottom half. Like, we have not even started getting into the ones that I get excited about. And so this one is, I would also say, 7.
And that gets me really excited about the rest of the movies.
Yeah, like, that's the thing. This one is pretty good, and it's on the lower half, in my opinion, if I recall. And I've seen all of them at some point, but I'm, re-going through this journey, and I'm excited about some of the movies we're gonna get to. So
no, that's awesome.
But I mean, I thought this one, it was pretty good. Like, it was better than I remember it being, because the first time I watched it, I remember thinking like that movie was just all right. But this time when I watched it, because the first time I watched it, I was watching it with like teenager eyes. I mean, older teenager, but teenager nonetheless. This time I watched it with adult eyes, and I had much more appreciation for it because, when I was younger, I just wanted to see a bunch of fighting and, cool shit. And there was some cool shit in here, but like, not just like overly, like, it wasn't a lot of over the top fight choreography and, all that. And that's fine now. I still like that. Don't get me wrong. Like, there are going to be some of these movies that, like, I like them because of the violence. Or
no, you need that action pack. You need that action
pack. Like, that's a part of why this world intrigues me. But I was able to appreciate what this movie had in it and a lot of the things that it was able to speak to and the historical context. Those are things that I can appreciate a lot more now than I did as a youth. many moons ago. So I enjoyed this movie. If you're listening to this, hopefully you've already watched it. And hopefully you will join us on this journey through DC animation. In the next episode, we will be discussing Batman Gotham Knight. So, until then, salutations.